Okay, so we're going to pray. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord Jesus, we just ask you in a special way to be with us today. All these couples have come. They've given the time freely to be here, to help learn and grow together, and to help and hopefully celebrate the image of your Trinity in their lives, so that they can be a witness to the world, to those in their families, to any children that might come, to any children that are there. They just want to be a witness of your love. So we just ask you to bless them, to give them the strength and the grace to make it through this sacrament and into the sacrament, so that they can live a life that is certainly worthy of your love. And we ask you to bless us in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right. So this is recording. Okay, so how I want to start out here is the church. The church has a vested interest in your success in your marriages, as of course do you, and it's obvious from you, but we all do. Anytime I go to a wedding, and it's not corny to say so, I really feel like it's an affirmation of my own love for my wife. I mean, we all know the statistics on the number of people who are not getting married. So little by little, this is becoming an anomaly. It's becoming quite difficult, I guess, for the church to try to, I'll use the word sell. Why is this so important, the sacrament of matrimony? Is it just some institution that's sort of been perpetuated and now it's time to be rethought? This is what we're up against. We're up against it in the sense that people find it just to be utilitarian. They no longer recognize the deep, abiding love that comes not just between each other, but between them and Christ. So, we always share things with ourselves. I mean, my wife do. Like the idea of the two pendants. I'm not mocking it if anybody, if that's important to somebody, but like two halves of a whole. That's not really the church's understanding of this. We don't complete each other. In other words, there has to be something transcendent. When I use that word, I mean there has to be something that takes us out of ourselves as a couple. So the idea that all we ever need in the world is each other, all we ever need is our love, not necessarily true, and that's important, so we're not trashing it, but if we leave it at that, it almost becomes a mutual egoism. I know it sounds odd, but we can almost discover that we're really loving ourselves and the other person, and nothing is outside of us. So think of, like on a very earthly way, something that the two might share that holds them together. Sometimes it could be, watching movies. Sometimes it could be hunting. Like my daughter and her husband, they loved, hunting and spotting. It's something outside of themselves. Okay, that is important, but it's a very physical, material type thing. So the higher we go on these order of goods, the more important the thing outside of the couple is that they're searching together, then the deeper things are between them. So when we make that transcendent third God, when it's two people working together towards a goal, and that goal is God, now we have something worthwhile. Now we have something that's lasting. Because when finances hit, and they always do. I mean, first of all, there's no way I could presuppose that everybody here is in the same situation. Over the course of doing this, and this is a great size group, by the way, I've done this in this diocese where I've had 106 people in a cafeteria, and I'm sort of like in the middle, and they're both, it's like, at Congress must be with Republicans and Democrats. I'm in the middle, shouting on both sides. And my hearing's bad because I listened to way too much Zeppelin when I was a kid, so my voice reverberating in a cafeteria just, doesn't work. So this is a nice sized group for this. And I've already forgotten what I was going to say. So I'll just move on to whatever else I was thinking. I have a lot of those moments. But the truth of it is it's not, I'm sorry, we can't presuppose a situation. So I always presuppose there are people living together. I always presuppose that there are people who have been married before and have sought out the annulment process, or people that have lost somebody, so there's children involved. We all have unique circumstances. And the church just starts wherever you're at. I mean, it has to. How can we do anything else? This idea of the perfect, if you come out of high school and you get married and you do the traditional way, God bless you. Because it's a great witness to love that's found early, but a lot of us have made mistakes throughout our lives. So we're trying to figure out how do we resolve those? How do we point them in the right direction? So this is what this is about. This is sort of to help you make this decision and then make it with a good heart, with a good mind, and a true love. It's going to be the hardest thing you ever do. Bar nothing. I can tell you for myself, I have a good marriage. I can literally say we've never had like a fight. Now, maybe people say that's not healthy. We've kind of resolved things different ways. We don't keep it inside, we just haven't had a good old fight, and that's all right. Because sometimes, you always say things you don't want to say, and it depends on the temperament of the person too. Sometimes people are more hot-headed, and that's how they express themselves, and you have to work that stuff out in other ways to communicate. But I have found it to be the most difficult thing I've ever done. So I've already shared with my wife, and she understood completely. She didn't take it offensively, that if anything, God forbid, happened to her, I'm done. I have no intentions of dating and getting married again. Now, that's not the sound pessimistic. That's the sound how much effort this is required of you. And it drains you. A good marriage should leave you drained at the end of the day, because it's going to be a total self-giving of yourself. Now, we're up against the world here. I mean, just for instance, what do you think the world understands marriage to be? You can raise your hand. There's no right or wrong answers. Watch the sitcoms. What do you think you see and when I say the world, I'm talking about our culture. The culture, particularly here in the United States. What do you think they portray marriage as?
Disposable.
Disposable, absolutely. All right, anybody else? Do you have your hand up? No? I'm used to being a teacher. You can't make movements with just the hand, the stretches, that all counts. Disposable, serial, right? I mean, we understand monogamy here in the West as one at a time. If you're monogamous, well, this is my 5th marriage, but I've only ever had one at a time. Well, that's a serial monogamy. That's not lifelong, right? And that's not to, try to discredit any situation somebody had that had to be resolved. That's just our understanding of it. It's also, I think, a little utilitarian. We look for benefits in it for each other. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, there are benefits for each other. You don't go into this not receiving anything. But sometimes we look at it as we're pulling our resources together, which is what makes cohabitation look so attractive. Because really, well, that's just taking, I can't remember who it was, a famous theologian / comedian, because most theologians, when you get to know them, are pretty much wiseacres. But they said, living together before you're married is as much preparation for marriage as sleeping is preparation for death. It doesn't work that way. The commitment changes everything, right? Now, when I was young, I understood what the church was teaching as rules. I really did. For whatever reason, because I didn't investigate it really at the time, I thought there were these, purple or red pointy hat guys in Rome who sat down and thought, what should we tell them? We should really say this is what's important. And I struggled with that. I struggled with staying even in the Catholic Church. What do I understand of this? And I also don't presuppose everybody's Catholic. I decided to throw that one in, because my wife was not Catholic, by the way, when we got married. As you well know, it's not a requirement, right? But I thought, let me check out this before I get too deep into making my own resolution on whether or not I agree with it. In other words, I didn't want to leave something I didn't understand, which has been my experience oftentimes in my own family, in my own ministries, is that I find that sometimes people leave, they had a caricature of the church that was not true. But there were other things floating. This is very dynamic. Nobody just simply makes a decision on one point. But my point is this. I have never really met anybody who said I left the Catholic Church because they had an issue with transubstantiation. It doesn't usually work like that. It's usually there's something else involved there. So it becomes very difficult, and what we are up against is a divorce rate that's out of hand. It really is. And I don't get too deep into the sociological statistics because they can always be countered, right? So if they say the divorce rate hovers around 50–51%, that might be true for the general population, but it may not be true for you. I understand that. But one other thing I never thought of until this past year is when we start hearing divorce rates, that's the percentage of people who are getting divorced, not the percentage of people who have already been divorced. In other words, somebody can be divorced twice, get married, and then be in a lifelong relationship after that, and that statistic doesn't really show up as a divorce in the last 10 years because they've been with that person. So my point is this on that, is that we have to find a way to do better. And I don't want to give anybody the impression that we're trying to divorce-proof a marriage. The Catholic Church is not going to work like that. In other words, to be quite frank, I want your marriages to be kick-ass. I really do. I mean, who wants to go into marriage saying, we just don't want to get divorced? That's not how we do this. We're trying to figure out how can you make a marriage, quite frankly. Could you imagine, this, and I want you to look ahead. This is how you should do a lot of things in your life. Look ahead and work backwards. What do you want 20 years from now? Do you want to celebrate your 20th anniversary and have your neighbors look over at you and say, almost in a good, envious way, if you can say it that way, what do they have? What is it, that couple? I can't understand it. I've never seen two people love each other that much. Unbelievable. That's what you want. You want to hit your 35th mark, and you want your kids to stand up and toast you and just say flat out, Mom, Dad, you set the bar too high. I don't even know how I'm going to do it. That's what you want. That's going to be extraordinarily difficult, but doable. That's the good part. The good part is this is entirely doable, and there's a good and a bad part to this. It's up to us. It actually is up to us every single year or moment or whatever we want to talk about. We literally choose our outcome. Now, circumstances arise, okay? So I can't speak so universally, and I'm not trying to do that, okay? But generally speaking, we are the result of our own choices. Now, we can always recover from those, but sometimes that's not so much, right? I was up home visiting my mother a couple months ago, and the priest at my mother's home parish had told from the pulpit, and I had to get him afterwards because I couldn't believe it. He said, I've been in this parish since 2001, so 13 years. He said, somebody had come to him needing a baptismal certificate. I'm not quite sure what the arrangement was. He said, just out of curiosity, I spent some time going through the file of every single marriage that I presided over in that 13 years. He said, I added them up. This is in a Catholic church. 85% of them are now divorced. 85%. That's extraordinary. You know, and we're not going to do it here. But who would raise their hand and say, that'll be me? Nobody thinks that. We're always the ones that are going to make it, right? So in other words, without judging on a person's situation, because I know it varies, but living together, it reduces, it increases your chance of divorce 20%, 20 to 30%, okay? And I've said this to some people, and they say, well, that's just a statistic, though. I said, all right, because you're right. I mean, statistics, you know, you can use them each way, I get it. And the statistic doesn't ever mean it's going to be you. I said, but with that knowledge now, if you had two cars, you want to borrow your dad's car or whatever to go to the beach, right? And he says, well, I got two cars. That one runs just fine. That one breaks down 30% of the time. Which one would you choose? Nobody's going to just choose the 30% one. But see, we do with our actions. We choose it indirectly. This is what I mean by we have this freedom and we choose it indirectly, and this adds to it. And can it be overcome? Well, sure. And by the way, the reason why I don't like the statistic so much is because that statistic, if you move on, if you get married in your late 20s and your 30s and you cohabitate, for some reason, the divorce rate doesn't increase. But ironically, what they have found that increased was personal satisfaction in their marriage. So people who have living together, even in the late 20s and 30s, by the time they hit their 10-year mark, they have a self-reported lower appreciation for their own marriage. Why that is, I don't know. You can only go so far. Plus, we're not here to lay out statistics. That stuff's available to you guys. I'm here to kind of make the church's case for this, because it sounds presumptuous when I say the church is an expert in the human person. Yeah, right. Because you start thinking of all the things that you've heard bad about the church over the years. You know, we go back to the Crusades, we come up to these abuse situations, and for somehow we think, well, they didn't get it right then. But that's not what I'm only talking about. We always have weaknesses in people, and people are always part of the institution. So that's always the case. But the truth of it is they really are an expert in the human person. They've had 2,000 years to iron this stuff out. So that's what I'm going to start to talk about, because before I even talk about unity, and here's how the date this morning will go. We'll talk about unity a little bit, then we'll take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about the procreative contraceptive parts, okay? When it comes to the human person, okay, we all know as Christians we're made in the image of God. But really, what does that mean? In other words, I'll tell you something. What is great about bringing philosophy to bear on some of this stuff is that philosophy looks at the most simplest questions, and it looks for answers for those. Answers that we think we know, but we really don't know, because they're too obvious of a question. In other words, if I asked you flat out, can you tell me what does it mean to be a human person? We would struggle. Well, I know that, but the more you think of it, the more you realize you don't know. I mean, that's usually the general experience, exceptions aside. So when we say we're made in the image of God, and that's who we are as a human person, we have to ask ourselves, what does that possibly mean? The first thing it means, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you what it means, and then I'm going to tell you what the world says it means. So you can see there's a clear demarcation between us and the world. The one upside, if you want to call it that, to a lot of things going on in the world that are opposed to Christianity is it's getting easier and easier to see the differences between the two. So we don't live in a theophonic state where the state is so tied to the church that we really can't see the difference. Pretty much now we can say, here it is here, and here it is there, all right? So the first thing we're made in the image of God is that we are rational beings. Now let's not underplay that. We have a mental capacity to know things, and love is a way of knowing, okay, and to know God. So that may not seem overwhelming to us until you realize, what does the world and the culture say? It says that we are basically living at the expense of our own instincts. In other words, the science of genetics is wonderful, but it's never going to tell us everything, okay? Just like if we can take the brain out of a human person and scrutinize it to the nth degree, that's not the human person. That's not my mind. It's my brain. It's just the organ of my mind. And obviously it's connected, right? Because if I have a brain injury, it can change my disposition and my personality, but it doesn't tell everything about me. So we're told by the world that, look, follow your instincts. And you can think about that, how that might affect marriage. Our wants, our desires, anything, and it could be sexual, it could be food, it could be material. We start to think, well, I can't help it. In other words, we won't talk about homosexuality hardly at all, which may seem ironic, but people that I have been in conversation with homosexual orientations have said, why do you guys always talk about us so much? Why is this such a big deal? I said, it's not. I give a 2.5 hour talk, and I might spend 3 or 4 sentences even talking about it. It's really not. I said it comes up, but it's really not that important. But okay, let's talk about, there's a genetic orientation for that. Well, but see, there's also thought to be found a certain genetic orientation for promiscuity. In other words, is the male really meant to be with just one person? Maybe not. Maybe that drive that most guys feel, to go out and about, maybe that is something that's quite natural to them. And suppressing that then is bad. But the church steps in and says, no. We're not a slave to our instincts. See, now that may sound like it's a rule. See, when I was young, I would have thought that's just a rule, right? Don't have sex before marriage. That's a rule. But when I start to understand that where it's based in is, we don't have to be slaves to our instincts. That holds the human person in quite higher a deal than the world would be. That, hey, that's really where you're being driven genetically and instinctually. So we have to consider that. Okay, the second aspect of this, we could talk about freedom. And this one I'll expand a little bit more, because when you or I were to heard freedom, for the most part, we're thinking of leave me alone. Liberalism, right? I want to be free from this. I want to have a total autonomy. That's what the world pretty much will give us. So when anybody tries to put on you and say, here's how within your marriage, here are things that would lead to certain things that are good for you, they seem like an imposition placed on you. And especially in marriage, all the struggles and all the things that we're going to be going through in our marriages. And by the way, there's never a moment where you get over the hump and you're free in marriage. I was talking to a guy just a few weeks ago, maybe a month, brokenhearted, tearing. This was like, a good blue-collar biker kind of guy, in tears because his parents of 33 years have now decided to get divorced. So, there's no like, boy, I made it past the 70th year, now it's home run. I made it past 15. There's no hallmarks like that. This is until death. And it's going to be that difficult in the sense that it's going to be that much demanding, I should say, not difficult as it was in the beginning. So the church's understanding of freedom is so much different and so much more nuanced. What it really says is that freedom is really not autonomy, but the ability to do that which you were designed to do. So whatever gifts and whatever innate desires you have, to bring them to completion is freedom. Now, that sounds odd, it sounds a little theoretical, so let me put it into very simple terms. If we could personify it like a train engine, okay, like say like Thomas the Tank Engine maybe. He looks on his rails, and he can only go wherever the train tracks are. But he drives, or he rolls on his tracks past the beach, past the woods, and thinks, I want to go down, because you've never seen railroad tracks down by the beach, right? I really like to go down by the beach. I'm being restrained by these rails. It limits my freedom. All right, so we can grant its wish somehow. We pick up the rail car and we put it on the sand. Well, you can only imagine what would happen. Nothing. It just sinks in a little bit. It doesn't move. Why? It's not designed for that. It could have no freedom in that. It wanted that. It desired that. It seemed like that was attractive to it. But it turns out, as the train was designed, it was not designed to be there. And the same thing in the woods. We can put it in the woods. Even if it could manage to roll a little bit, how far would it go to hit trees? It can't make turns. Okay, put me back on the tracks, and woof, off it goes. Once we could discover our design, and really that's what we're doing in the human person. If we could discover the design of the human person, then to live in harmony with that is absolute freedom. It doesn't seem it, because the world just, in the back of your head's in the back of my head, I'm still thinking, yeah, but I'm not allowed to do that. You know, it's like your car. I mean, who would, okay, so every 4,000 miles you have to change the oil. Well, who's going to say, well, screw that. I want to put molasses in. Who the heck are they going to tell me what I should do? It's some rule that GM wants to put out there, or the oil company, because they want to sell all their oil. So, well, go ahead. You know, you can assert your autonomy in that situation. They'll call you a pedestrian, but, you know, you can go ahead and do that, right? So you're going to realize that there was a design with this engine, and to stay in line with that design is not an imposition placed on you from the outside. See, we struggle with law and freedom. How can law and freedom work together? Because doesn't freedom limit my law? Okay, well, if you or I think so, how about we remove all the stop signs in Reading for a day? Yeah, I mean, all of a sudden we see that these things were put in place to help us travel more freely, to manage an intersection. So it isn't something and this is much more intimate. We're talking about the human person. So we have to stop thinking that these laws are placed on us from the outside. They're discovered by our design, and all we're trying to do is live in line with them. And if we can do that in marriage, it will not make your marriage divorce-proof. It'll make your marriage kick-ass. There's no other way about it. It's that beautiful. Okay, what else? This is another important one. We are incarnate beings, body and soul. Now, that's not just a Christian precept, by the way. Ancient philosophers came up with that. Now, you might say, okay, fine. Who would have an issue with that? Most people. They don't say, we don't believe there's not a body and soul. Nobody responds like that. What they believe is, you're inside. What's important is in here. In other words, the body, somehow, the physical never displays what's interior, right? So, I mean, this is going to sound odd, but if somebody really truly believed that, if you saw me smiling, would you say, oh, Steve's lips are smiling? No, it's me. This is all me. It's not just my body. But what? You know, some young girls might dress very provocatively. You know, we have a few issues with that from time to time. Roll your skirt down, that type of thing. And the truth of it is, well, you can't judge me by the way I look. Well, okay, I guess if somebody picked out your clothes for you and made you put them on, we couldn't, but did you make a decision to do that? Yes. But God doesn't, judge me by how I look. Do you think he would judge how you think? Yeah. Do you think how you dress has anything to do with connection on how you think? Yeah. Well, then maybe he does care. Maybe it is an expression. Well, you can't judge a book by its cover. Well, you're right. But you're not a book. And the body's not a cover for you. See how it pops in there? Nobody starts out by saying the body and the soul are separate. They divide it by the way that they talk and interpret things. It's like the young girls even here on dress down days. We had just flat out no yoga pants. They're so comfortable. Yeah. Well, maybe I should start wearing them, and I could drop that chalk all day long. Yeah, that freaked them out. I said, you get my point now, okay? You get my point. Let's not pretend that image doesn't portray something. I was young. I know what it is that we're trying to do. I'll give you a good story. Now, my middle daughter, she's just didn't quite pick up. I wouldn't say she's naive, but on this one, she was totally off, right? So we're down in Baltimore, and we literally got into a bad section of town, and we started driving out. So we call it the red light district, right? Well, my daughter's one of these cat people. If there's ever going to be some, old spinster living with 50 cats, it'll be her. So we're driving by this building, the Pussycat Club. And she wants to proclaim to my wife, that's my kind of place. Okay. I don't think so. Outside, literally, my wife and I have 3 daughters. We were all in there. Well, actually, it was 2 of my daughters and one of their friends. And there were probably 15 guys and this girl walking around in a short skirt and decent heels and a very, very tight shirt. Just, you know, she was selling something, okay? Let's leave it at that. I said to my daughters, I figured she doesn't know what the Cat Club is. Maybe I can do a teaching moment here. I said, let me ask you something. I said, that woman, she's got to be in her early 20s, late teens. I said, does she really look that different than how your friends dress outside of Berks Catholic? No, not really. Okay, well, she's a prostitute. My wife's like, just leave it alone. Yes, she is. You know, let's not start this. Even the feminists from the 70s have exclaimed, what have we done? You know, we've raised our children to dress like prostitutes and then make no connection. Now, we're not calling them prostitutes, right? And make no connection to who they are as persons. This doesn't say who I am. It doesn't. That's interesting. Then what does it say? You know, if I show you a picture of 3 different people dressed, one provocatively, one not so much, one conservatively, you would have a comment on that. We're not supposed to judge people. All right. So let's talk about that real quick. Because it is true. You know, all our situations are different in life, yours and mine, right? I don't know what you went through. You don't know what I went through. So let's be a little careful on how we throw stones, right? Let's not judge. Let's also not worry about who goes to hell. The Catholic Church has never done that, right? They haven't put Judas and they haven't put Hitler in hell. We have no revelation on that, so we leave it alone. But if we're not going to be judging moral situations, then what are we doing as human agents? You mean I can't call something bad that's bad? So if somebody steals something, I can't say that's wrong. Is that being judgmental? If somebody beats up somebody else because they have power over them or sexually abuse somebody, I can't call that bad? I'm not supposed to judge? No, we're called to do that, right? We have to be sensible about it, so we have to be careful when somebody throws that out. And I don't say that you're doing that, but I do that to myself sometimes, you know? Like, you know, am I judging the person? Maybe I shouldn't judge them, and I have to work my way through it and think, well, no, there's an objective thing that's going on here. I have to be concerned about that, all right? So anyway, so the Catholic Church says, look, you're an incarnate being. You can't separate this. And what that's going to be so important for us in the next segment is that everything we do with our bodies is us. You know, we can't say we love us inside but not on the outside, okay? Or we love you on the outside but not on the inside. We got to watch how we flip that around. Another thing is that we're relational beings, okay? We are meant to be in relation with other people. It's important. We can't, I mean, just think of this. Language. You cannot have a thought without language. I know that if you have to spend some time really wondering about it, but you always think in terms of words. And just think of language. What purpose does language have? To communicate. Well, with who? You know, unless you talk to yourself often, it's for other people. We're built for this. Now, you know, the students always bring up some guy that likes living on an island and he has tattoos like a lizard and he doesn't seem, you know, to want to be in public. You ever see that? There's a guy, you know, well, you'll get the joke of it in the second part here. I said to them, I said, well, that's interesting. I said, and where did you hear about this guy? Well, I saw him on TV. Oh, there's somebody who doesn't like the public, you know? I'll invite the camera crews in. But I saw him. He like slit his tongue so it looks like a lizard, and he's got these like leopard tattoos all over, and he wants to live by himself. Well, okay. And that aside, he still managed to talk. He still managed to do all these things. We're built for this. And if we're built for relations, then this relation is something that's quite natural for us. It's really an acute, when you have, you know, intimacy, we always think sexual intimacy, but we have to move beyond that, right? Because there's a different type of intimacy that will be between you two than it's between you and your parents, or you and your children, you and your cousins. But it's all intimate, right? And intimacy is just going out of ourselves and trying to draw the other person close to us, and that too. And we all need that. In other words, we would wither. Without relationships, we would wither. We don't need to go too far to know the tragedies of some psycho that kept a person in the basement for years. What happens? Okay? We're relational people. And it's important to us. Okay? But what does the world really say? Well, the world really, it doesn't negate it per se. But it really does say that we're independent, right? Stand on your own. It almost makes the idea that if I lean on you or you lean on me, that there's a certain weakness involved there. But there's not if it's something that's built within the human person. I really need you. Now, we might get it within a marriage. We need each other. That's fine. But we need a lot more people than the people we're married to. And there's nothing wrong with leaning on that. There's nothing weak in that. It's actually a strength, you know. Because, a little aside, you know anybody with Down syndrome? Anyone? Even if you don't, you've been around them. Okay, there is a certain handicap to it, right? There are certain things they can't do. But on the other hand, don't they really just act in a way that we wish we would act if we could just take away all the filters? Because if you're around one, what do? They walk up to you and they hug you and they say they love you. And they don't really care who's making fun of them, right? I mean, on some level, that's what we need. But I had this video I show the kids of a photographer in New York that did a journalistic thing where he would find people, strangers, and ask, can I photograph them together? And nothing provocative and nothing, you know, off color, but he would make them like put their arms around each other and maybe just hold hands. And he then wrote something on this and said, you know, after 5 minutes, you would swear to God these people had just had Thanksgiving dinner together at their grandparents' house. It's amazing once we allow this breakdown, but we're all scared. You know, we've been made fun of, we've been taken advantage of, we've been mocked, all these types of things. All right, so this is what I'm talking about. The relationality is built within us, okay? And one of the last things is that we're supernaturally oriented. In other words, the fact that there's nothing in this world, including just ourselves, even in marriage, will never satisfy us 100%. You don't even really need to make a God argument about this. You can make this on a philosophical point of view. What in this world satisfies every human person? I know Father Gene, who's here, he just had some slides up. He was showing the students the famous last words, because we just celebrated the feast of St. Ignatius of Antioch yesterday, whose last words were, I want union with God. And the last words of rich people, Mayer from MGM, you know, the M in the MGM, just sort of thought was all worthless. I mean, this is a guy that, you know, was a mogul. So these people that find out that at some level, the money does not satisfy. Or rich people would be the happiest people in the world, right? Now, we're not going to mock being impoverished, okay? But we all know money doesn't really bring happiness, but what do we go after, right? That's part of the fall, by the way. The fall of original sin, we've kind of this distorted vision of God and our own imaging in God. So we seek power and prestige almost everywhere except where it should be, and we can never satisfy this inner drive that we're after. Okay, so we're supernaturally oriented. Okay, now I'm not going to make fun of acronyms, and my kids will be impressed if I can get this right. But what does the world teach? YOLO. Is that right? YOLO. YOLO. I was close. I was close. Okay, now, you only live once, fine. If you mean that in the sense that there are certain things you'd like to do, okay? But the idea of a bucket list, I got to get it in, well, why to get it in if this isn't it? I mean, in other words, if we are supernaturally oriented, and if there really is an afterlife, and really that afterlife will satisfy us more than anything here, then should we not be living in some sort of way that at least direct us towards that and not farther away from it? Do we really have to experience everything here? It's true this isn't a dry run. You know, you got one life, but it's also not the only life we have. What the world really does say, get it in, right? Retirement's no longer retirement. Retirement is get a vacation house. You know, I mean, I'm not trying to knock anything, okay? But we spend our life driving for these things. In other words, look at the amount of, you know, of gyms there are around here, okay? I mean, you wouldn't know it by me, but, you know, there are so many different exercise routines, you can name it. There's, you know, max 25 and max 90, there's all kinds of things. Could you imagine if we had that sort of interest in being virtuous? We could really transform our neighborhoods. But we don't, because we're fearful and because we live like this is it. And so there's anything wrong with being physically fit? Absolutely not. But let's watch substituting lower, lesser physical goods for spiritual goods. The spiritual goods are always higher, right? People say if you have your health, you have everything. Not really true. I mean, if you want a good health. But how many people have given up their health and sacrificed for other people? Martyrs? And let's forget about martyrs. How about people like Martin Luther King that died for a cause? Now, he didn't purposely die, but you know, he put himself in a situation that wasn't going to be healthy for him. He could have went and probably lived his life to an old age. People are always willing to lay down their life for values and for virtues and for ideals. Those people put the spiritual above the physical. So all of this plays in. And the last thing really is about the fact, and this is something that it's actually a part of a thesis I've been working through, that we're made to gift each other, to gift the other person. We just don't understand what a gift is, because when we think of a gift, we think of an exchange, you know? Like it's something, I'll get something back from you. If nothing else, maybe I'll get the notoriety that I gave to you, right? Doesn't it always impress us a little bit that we have tons of fundraisers, but that sometimes these fundraisers are so expensive that most people can't afford to go to them? You know, I mean, there's a little bit of irony going on there. I remember Mother Teresa one time walked out of her own fundraiser when she realized just the money for the table settings at the table she was at with the food can feed 20 people. And she walked out. You know, for some reason, we have to have, some sort of, event where we're all running for somebody and we all get t-shirts and we all feel good about it. I'm not mocking any of that stuff, but somehow we think that that's the total sacrificing of ourselves to somebody else. I wonder if we could just convince ourselves that we don't really need the t-shirts, we don't need to go do this. Here's the $50. Do something with it. Be good. Anyway, so we're made. So this is going to be total self-donation of you to the other person, okay? So here's the unity. Now I'm really going off topic on what the book said, all right? But kind of purposely, because I'm just guessing what helped me might help you. That's all I'm guessing. I'm not saying you're like me, but I'm thinking if there's a certain level of skepticism or a certain level of I'm not quite buying it, I'm open to it, but I don't quite get there yet, that's where I was. And by the way, I wish they'd have had this when I was getting married. My wife says to me 100 times, boy, if they would have been able to tell us this stuff when we were married, we wouldn't have had to learn it ourselves. Well, not really ourselves, we would have had to learn it, by our own fruition anyway. And that's true. But that's the case now. So I had the advantage of growing up in this little Italian community, and everybody knew everybody, and everybody went to the same church, the same school, and down the street was, the last name was Giordano. They changed it to Jordan when they came here. He was 100 years old, and Virginia was 93 years old. And I was friends with their grandson. So when I went over, and here they were, at this point, both sick, just from my old age, didn't have a particular ailment. And they were in those hospital beds, the ones that go up and down. And both were on the ground floor inside the room. It was the only room big enough for 2 hospital beds. And there, between them, was just enough room for an attendant to get between the beds. And the whole time, they had their hands, holding hands across. At 76 years, they celebrated marriage. And that, I gotta tell you, you talk about these teachable moments, that has always been impacted on my mind. I couldn't get it out. And when they asked him, what's your secret to longevity, Joseph? He says, 1 woman my whole life, and a shot of anisette in my coffee every morning. So I figure those are 2 good things to do, all right? Those are 2 good things to do. But nonetheless, I thought, why is that not possible? Now we don't want people, okay, somebody might say, well, in the old days, people stayed together even if they were getting hit. Yeah, we're not saying that's a good thing. But what's changed? The human person hasn't changed. We're still the same human people we were 300 years ago, 1,000 years ago. It's just that we are really succumbing to the arguments that are coming from the outside because they're convincing on the surface. And they appeal to things that are part of us. In other words, our desire to be, that freedom can be twisted. And this is what, we can't get Satan out of this, right? We can't be walking around here like, we think that, Satan's everywhere on every corner. But in a way, he is. And if we're not comfortable talking about spiritual things, then, this is the wrong business to be in for all of us. But the truth of it is, there's one person who's going to be your worst enemy, and that's Satan. And why am I saying this? Because it sounds so obvious and it almost sounds like, yeah, okay, what's this, Halloween, we're going to have like some scary, movie stories. You're going to have instances where you're going to fight. You're going to be mad at each other. You're going to take advantage of each other. You name it. You're going to use each other. And you're going to think that the spouse is the issue. And this is difficult because I know if me and my wife have, if there's a tension between us, and you know how easy that is to feel. When there's tension, you get mad at the other person. And what do you struggle with? You struggle with not demeaning them. You struggle with not belittling them. You struggle with not yelling at them or saying something that you're going to regret. And if they could just change their mind, and all of a sudden, it dawns on you, it dawns on me, she's not the enemy. Demons are the enemy. And I know it sounds corny, but that's the absolute truth. Demons are the enemy. They're our true enemies, not each other. So all of a sudden, I think that, and it really does turn the stuff around. In other words, I'm not, whatever it is that she did, even if I really think that she was the one that was wrong in this case, and sometimes, let's face it, sometimes one spouse really is the one in the error. It's not always shared, but most of the time it's shared. But sometimes it isn't. Even when it is, what do you want the outcome from this? Divorce? Is that where we're going to go with this? No. Okay, so what we're going to do? We're not going to talk to each other for 5 days? No. So I'm going to walk around and look like I'm pissed so that she feels guilty? I'm going to hold so much resentment in that hopefully she'll feel guilty? I mean, where are we going with this? There's really nowhere to go. I mean, if you sit there and say, well, I'm going to keep it up until she agrees with exactly my position, good luck with that one. I wouldn't do it, you know? You'd probably tick me off even more if you tried to get me to do that. So what happens is, Satan's over there in the corner with his stinking Staples Easy button, and if he wants to piss you two off, all he has to say is, you know what? He didn't do that because he loves you. He does it because he wants something. You know he's always taking advantage of you. And all of a sudden that starts stirring in your mind, and he's over there hitting that easy button the whole time thinking, this is so easy. And we give it in. But see, this is that transcendent third thing. The minute that we start realizing it's not just us. We don't have to fight this together. There's grace involved. If there wasn't grace involved, we're all done. We're all done. This is not an institution that's easy to go through. All right? So when we talk about unity, here's what's at stake. The visible, our bodies, our marriages, our relationships, our world, is the only way anybody knows anything invisible. If I stood here and said, I'm really happy today, this is the happiest day in my life. I mean, there's a disconnect, right? So what exactly exudes my happiness or my excitement or it's my body, right? So this has to play into it. So the Trinity. First of all, nobody here ever seen Jesus. The minute you see Jesus, it's either like you're having a miracle going on or the lights are out, one of the two. So nobody's ever seen Jesus. The only way that we know of him is through us. So I always tell the students, if you want to know why more people aren't attracted to the Catholic faith, it's because we don't make it look attractive. I mean, could you imagine joining a club where all the members of the club did nothing but complain about the club and the club's leaders and how the club never does anything? Well, who would want to join that club? Now, the church isn't a club, just making an analogy. Okay, it's like that in marriage, too. What does the sitcom show about marriage? The old ball and chain. I mean, it was a time when they did it like with the Archie Bunker where it was so obvious, everybody got it. But now it's so subtle, it almost doesn't make it look very attractive. I mean, you'd be hard-pressed to find sitcoms where you have a healthy relationship between the mother and the father, if they're married at all. Even shows like that I love, like The Big Bang Theory, I mean, there's nobody married on that show, and everybody's having sex all the time. It's to the point where it just seems that's how it is. I mean, we're almost so desensitized to it, we don't even question it anymore. Unless we think that doesn't really matter, it helps us lose, it not helps, it causes us to lose our focus, because eventually we start to internalize that. And then really it's not so bad, right? We always compare ourselves to somebody that's worse. Well, it's not like they're, just using each other. I mean, it's mutual. It's mutual and it's consenting. That's better than if it weren't. Like, that's the standard, right? So what's really on the table here is for people to know God's love. This is the sign. A sign represents something other than itself to a knowing power, right? A sign, like a stop sign, is something conventional. We have to make it up. If we took a stop sign and put it in ancient Egypt, we go back in a time machine, the chariot's not going to come to it and just come to a halt. We had to say red octagons mean stop. But there are many signs that don't mean that. Okay, so the love that we have between each other, it's quite natural. The giving, we understand all this stuff. So we have to be a reflection of the Trinity and of God's love in our lives. And if we're not doing that, we're not making this attractive. But not only are we not making it attractive, we're also not really doing anything that's helping us as individuals. So we're making choices little by little that are putting us in that camp. And I hate to even think it, but that 85% get divorced. So when I was talking to the 52 couples, right, or whatever it was, the 104 people, I said, look, just on a world's point of view, in 7 years, half of you will be divorced. Anybody want to put bets down? I mean, that's a scary thing. I said, can you imagine if that was universal? 85%? Even in a group like this, that means maybe 2 couples. I mean, that's terrifying to think that. But what's even worse is that we've kind of brought it to that point. So when we talk about this unity, let's just real quick, and then we'll take a break. Let me see, somewhere I have the vows. Let's see what these mean. First, you have come here freely, without reservation, to give yourselves in marriage. What a beautiful thing. Do you know, your spouse, first of all, this is a vocation. Vocation means you have to be called to it. If you're not called to a vocation, get out of it before you make the commitment. And if you don't, if that sounds odd, think of a priest. Can you imagine a priest to live that? That's a difficult life for them. Can you imagine not really being called to that, but doing it for some ulterior motive? What a miserable life you will have. It's like that in marriage, too. We think marriage is the default vocation, right? When you were young. Are you going to be a priest? Are you going to be a nun? No, I'm going to get married. Like, okay, everybody gets married and some become nuns. It's a vocation we have to be called to. But what's beautiful about that is each of you chose the other person. How about that? They chose you. Maybe it could have had anybody in the world, but certainly could have had other people, but they chose you. Now, when you read, there's a lot of statistics that were done on children of divorce and also on people who have part of a marriage that was broken up because of adultery. And not universally, because there's always exceptions, but you know what the majority of the people who were betrayed? You know, if my wife committed adultery on me, I could tell you what I'd feel. Pissed. I'd feel like, oh man, you know, I'd feel like a fool. Like, how can I not see this? Who else knew this? I mean, I'd go through all those things, and they're probably all legitimate, right? But do you know what the one thing that universally they almost really break down over? I thought he chose me. And you found out that was not true. So when the church says that you come here freely without reservation to give yourselves in marriage, yeah, together, you're giving yourselves in marriage. What a beautiful thing. My wife could have chose anybody. She's a beautiful woman. I mean, I married up. You know, she chose me. She chose me. You hear that, honey? I married up. I'll play this for her later. Will you accept children willingly and lovingly from God? All right. We're going to talk about this more in the next segment, but children are an expression of our love. It's if children aren't truly a gift, you only need, and it could be you, or talk to somebody who has sterility issues, you know, infertility issues. For them, it's a tragedy. You know, it's like it's not a matter of having an heir. It's not a matter of somebody carrying on the name. All those are good things, but they're not. Those aren't motivations that we're after. It's an expression of this is ours. This came from. This was. Sometimes our love is so intense that we give it a name. That type of thing. And what a beautiful thing to enter a marriage and say, well, we don't want any children. It sets a tone on a lot of different levels. First of all, nothing. You know, the problem with a couple, like, you know, I'm not trying to ever pick on anybody's situation, but if we had children within a year or so after we were married, we wanted to right away. Sometimes people, for very serious reasons, hold off. And if you go 7, 8, 9, 10 years, without any judgment, you have to admit that you could really get into a situation where you're used to that, no kid in the house. And then the transition is going to be much, much harder. What happens is we tend to be selfish. We're built like this. I mean, we tend to get more selfish. Children pull you right out of your selfishness, especially husbands, depending on your wives. You know, however many children are on the room in the house, you're the number after them, you know. So I was number 1 until our first kid was born. Then I became number 3. When the second kid was born, 4. And then my other kid was born 5th. And I have 2 granddaughters. I am now number, I don't know, that make me 7 or 8. You know, I'm right just one step above the pets, you know. So, yeah, I did say that. She'll agree, though. So it takes us out of ourselves. And it's an expression of our love. So I'm not going to go too deep in that, but we're going to have to watch, like, our planning, right? Like somebody will say, well, I only want 2 kids. Well, maybe that's how it'll work out. But is that the place to start? Or is it really to start to say, because remember, there's a God involved in this. What do you want from us? What do you want from us? Who knows? Maybe you'll have 3. Maybe you'll adopt a couple. Maybe he'll put it on your heart to take in a foster kid. I mean, you don't know. So all I'm saying is, you don't make those decisions up front. It's, you know, let's watch. Now we're starting to feel like maybe we're asserting our freedom. Like, well, no, here comes that rule. But all I'm saying is just start from a different place. You know, what is it that you're asking of us? In other words, I want to be married forever. I want happiness. I guess you know that, God, right? So what's going to make me the happiest? If I have 2 kids in a bigger house, because this is the issue, right? Nobody ever says, I really like the bigger house or the kid? What should we have? Another kid or that really big house and a boat? Nobody makes decisions like that, but yet we do. In other words, we put ourselves in a situation where the child is not affordable because of what we've accumulated. So we have to work that way through, and you work that together, right? So it's always a communication, and that's what this last segment's really going to bring out, is that the whole thing's a communication. So I just want to end on this, and then we'll take a break. Give me like 5-10 minutes. We learned this stuff in the first part of Genesis, right? There's two creation stories, by the way. This isn't a scripture class. The first one isn't actually the newer version, right? Not the newer version, but a newer account where, God's very orderly and he sits up there and he speaks words and things get created and come together, right? In Genesis 2, chapter 2, verse 4, we have the second creation account, which they say is much older, all right? And God's more anthropomorphic, man. He's out there walking around. He's on the ground walking with, and he creates Adam out of dust, right? Out of the ground. Now here's what's interesting. He looks at Adam and he says, I've created him in my image, right? But he looks at Adam and he says, man should not be alone. Doesn't that say something about us being relational? About us needing other people? I mean, it's like he's like me. He goes, I have a trinity. He needs somebody else. So he creates all the animals, right? And he has Adam name them all. And naming is a sense of power. Like if you can name something, you have power over that. But that also tells us that, yeah, we are slightly better than the animals. It's not, it's not elitist to think that humans are, a greater being. We understand that to be true. But he names them all, and none of them satisfied. So what did he do? He puts Adam in this deep sleep. Now, if you read like the actual, in the Hebrew, it's really an annihilation. Adam's almost like put to deathbed. And then from his side, and by the way, not from his feet, not from his head, woman drawn from the side of man. All right, so we're not talking greater and lesser. And he creates woman, brings them up, and then all of a sudden, Adam looks at Eve and says, this is flesh of my flesh and bone of my bones. Yeah. By the way, that's not how he said it. He couldn't have. I don't know how many species there were, but tens of thousands, let's just guess. I'm telling you what, you call one of those matchmaker places, and you go through, like I have a friend, yeah, he went through 4 or 5 different, eHarmony, went through 4 or 5 different like dates and meetings. None of them worked out. Devastated, kind of. I mean, talk about, knocking you down. It's like, you get your hopes up and you get knocked down. You get your hopes up, you get knocked down, and all of a sudden you start to think you're worth nothing. It's me, The devil's pretty easy like that. He's over there with the easy button, right? Well, the last one, he was supposed to go out and meet in Norristown, and he got on his cycle and he took off down the turnpike and he turned around. He turned around because he wasn't mentally or emotionally prepared for another one. I can't do it. You know what? Screw it. Well, my wife's gone. I'm just going to live like this. Something made him turn around again. They just celebrated their 7th wedding anniversary. Now, he felt that way after 5 encounters with somebody that didn't quite fit the bill. I don't know exactly what Adam thought. So Adam did not simply say, at last is a bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. He was head over heels in love. The guy had to jump up and down, pick her up, and spin her around and say, this is unbelievable. This is unbelievable. And then the two shall become one. At that moment, if anybody doubts this is marriage, Jesus quotes that in the New Testament. So now we understand exactly what's going on here. Now that's our creation story. And just before I end, let's compare that. Because that's not the only creation story out there. The Babylonians had their own called the Enuma Elish. And I won't get into it deep. But in the Enuma Elish, there was this sea goddess, Tiamat, because the sea was evil in the ancient world, right? And I may not get it too accurate. I'm just going to try to condense it. So Tiamat was threatening the gods in the heaven. And the gods in the heaven, I guess, were worried that they would be defeated. So they created their own god, Marduk. Go and fight this for us. Well, Marduk has this idea, hey, if I'm going to do this and I win, then I want to be the supreme being. Okay, fine. So Marduk goes down and fights Tiamat, and sort of similar, rips the body of Tiamat in half and takes one half of the shell and fastens it at the dome in the sky, and with the other half fashions it at the dome of the earth. And then he sets the stars and everything else into motion, and he sets the calendar for them. And then he creates Babylonia on the earth to be a replication of what's in the heavens. And then Tiamat's husband Kingu comes after him, and he fights Kingu, rips Kingu apart. The blood of Kingu spreads and hits the ground, and from the blood of this devastation, all humans are formed. And they are formed to be slaves to Marduk. And the king of Babylonia is the representative of Marduk on the earth. Now that's a great story to tell who you are as a people if you're the king of Babylonia. If you're just a human person, you're nothing more than the aftermath of chaos. That's their story. So that's how they understood who they were as a people. So when we read these stories, rather than getting caught up in, is it really true? Is it evolution? It has nothing to do with that. It's not science. It's trying to tell us who we are as a people. It's a mythos story to give us an idea of who we are and what we pull from. And right from it, we see the two were made to be one. It's something beautiful, all right? Let's take a break. And we'll come back in 10 minutes, which will be, let's say 10:22.